I didn't just get to wear a flowing dress to follow along with the instructions of the ancient classic, but because we're doing a Taoist service, and so I get to wear the clothes that I feel most comfortable in, which are my clothes as a Taoist initiate. So Taoist insights for spring. Let's read our chapter again. And then I liked so much last week doing line by line scriptural analysis that we're going to do a little line by line scriptural analysis this week too. The Art of Life Through the Four Seasons. Huangdi said, the 3 months of the spring season bring about the revitalization of all things in nature. It is the time of birth. This is when heaven and earth are reborn. During this season, it is advisable to retire early. Arise early also and go walking in order to absorb the fresh, invigorating energy. Since this is the season in which the universal energy begins anew and rejuvenates, one should attempt to correspond to it directly by being open and unsuppressed, both physically and emotionally. On the physical level, it is good to exercise more frequently and wear loose-fitting clothing. This is a time to do stretching exercises to loosen up the tendons and muscles. Emotionally, it is good to develop equanimity. This is because spring is the season of the liver meridian, and indulgence in anger, frustration, depression, sadness, or any excess emotion can injure that meridian. We'll pause before the dire warning at the end to leave it on a more fun note. So, our 6 sources of the Unitarian Universalist living tradition involve things like scientific teachings and humanist teachings that advise us to move away from the idolatries of the spirit. We also, as Unitarian Universalists, a lot of our tradition comes down from these 2 Christian traditions, the Unitarians and Universalists. Then as well, there's actually a big Jewish base in our UU faith. And so we also invite in a lot of these just really cool Jewish teachings into the living tradition of Unitarian Universalism. And one thing you'll notice if you go to UU churches, excuse me, I'm not all broken up about that. I just need to clear my throat. If you go to UU churches regularly, is that we're also sort of a second home for pagans and earth-centered spiritual folks who maybe like to meet every Sunday instead of just 8 times a year or something like that. So the UU, because we're such a welcoming and cool place, one of our 6 sources of the living tradition is earth-centered spiritual traditions. Taoism, in case you didn't know, this is part of my mission to tell you today, in case you didn't know, Taoism is an earth-centered spiritual tradition. It's the indigenous spiritual tradition of ancient China. But if you think about ancient China, that is not a small place. Oh yeah, ancient China. So if you hear about Taoism, you know, some might hear me say, oh yeah, Taoism is an earth-centered spiritual tradition. It's the indigenous religion of ancient China. And you might go like, I thought it was a beautiful philosophy that we can debate upon in college classes on Eastern religions. Well, yeah, it's that too. And then some folks who know a little bit more about religious practice in more modern eras might go, oh, I thought Taoism was actually a religion and you worship the 3 pure ones. And there's the Chuanjin sect, and there's the Tianshi Celestial Master sect, and there's a Zhengyi Orthodox. Well, yeah, it's that too. And in the olden days, you know, to say Taoism is kind of like to say, it's a faux pas, in case you didn't learn this, let me let you know, to say Native American spirituality, right? Because look at America. It's a big old continent, right? And the spiritual practices of the Wampanoag people might be very different from the spiritual practices of the Ohlone people on whose unceded lands we now inhabit, which might be very different than the spiritual practices of the Nisiman people on whose unceded lands I own a house, right? So when you say Taoism, it's sort of a basket word for these indigenous practices of ancient China all the way into the modern era, where they've been influenced by Tibetan Buddhism actually coming over, because in some ages that was China. People have tried to make that China again for the last number of years. And there's all of this admixture in there. It's a big, wide tradition. But what I want to talk to you about is, okay, is that make a meter with your hand. Is that too nerdy? Just nerdy enough, or like the best amount of nerdiness? What do you think? Just enough? Okay, just good. Okay, good. I'm trying to know my audience here. A little bit more nerdiness, and then we're into fun. The tradition that I want to talk to you about, the scholars call Huang Lao Taoism, and the Lao is referring to Lao Tzu, which, if you did take that college course on Eastern spirituality or world religions, you'll have heard of Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is the purported author of what they call the Bible of Taoism, which is a text called the Tao Te Ching. And then the Huang is this person. Oh, my cursor doesn't show up there, but it will at home. This person, Huang Di, called the Yellow Emperor, which is this mythic figure loosely related to an actual historical figure. And these are some of the earliest known writings that came to be encompassed in what's called the Daoist canon, or just the whole corpus of teachings that Daoist traditions throughout the ages have kept. So the Huang Lao, the Lao part, Lao Tzu, is very philosophical text. The Tao Te Ching is all about how to go with the way of life and the watercourse way and all that groovy stuff that we heard in the 60s. That all comes from Lao Tzu. And then the Huang tradition tends to be these sort of Chinese medical practices, but we could actually call them yogic practices. They're very similar to the roots of some of the yogic practices we might see in India. Okay, don't get too nerdy. It's so exciting to me, though. So in Taoism, as an earth-centered spiritual tradition, they had as one of their highest ideals harmony with nature. Harmony with nature. So you'll see terms in Taoism. One big term is ziran, which means naturalness. You're supposed, and it doesn't just mean like in the West, this came over in the 60s and people were like, yeah, so stop brushing your beard, man. Naturalness. I follow the Tao. I'm a wayfarer. I follow the way. No, it actually means as if you had become part of nature. It's like knowing it. You could even translate it maybe as appropriateness. So it wouldn't be natural for me to come here with an unkempt beard because it wouldn't be appropriate. Okay, so they have this big goal of harmonization with nature. And this is very similar to other religious traditions that we see around the world. We may not think about them, but this came up for me this week, that in a lot of our, a lot of the churches in America are going to be Christian of some variety, and most of them have a liturgical calendar. Most of them have a liturgical calendar. So as I was thinking about this was brought up this week, and I was a little jealous. If I can be totally honest, I was a little jealous, because if you have a liturgical calendar, like, oh, what day is April 10th? Well, the dust flies off the big Bible. April 10th, reading of the day, blah, 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 blah. Oh, that seems so nice, instead of having to like pick a new reading every week. Gosh, and then it cycles back around. So April 10th, it's like, oh, I still have a homily from last year. I'll just tweak it just a little bit. I had a little bit of liturgical calendar envy. The ancient traditions, though, this comes from the reason why, according to us syncretists, the reason why you have like Easter in the liturgical calendar and Christmas in the liturgical calendar is that we human beings, whether we identify as earth-centered or earth-based or not, when the sky gets darker and the nights get longer, we need to invoke light. We need to invoke togetherness. We need to invoke the promise of the return of luminosity. And so you've got festivals like Christmas, maybe Hanukkah, I'm not sure, but you've got these festivals of bringing in this luminosity, banding together. And then you've got Easter, which we'll celebrate next week by having French toast, the great French tradition of Easter. Maybe do a French press coffee just to stay on theme. It could be fun. Okay. But there's this feeling have you noticed it? When the greenery starts to come back out, we don't notice it as much in California as you do in colder places, but when the greenery and the flowers start coming back out, we start to perk back up. Is that true for you? Do you notice the perking? Oh, it's springtime. Me, I'm sort of watching the COVID data, and so I don't have the optimism that some of my friends have. They're like, it's done, it's over. I'm like, well, I don't know. It might go the same way as the UK. Please put your mask back on, basically at all times in public. But even in spite of that, I'm like, you guys, let's go to the beach. Let's make plans. There's this spring energy that's happening. Like, I want to be optimistic in any way, despite the facts that I know. So all that is to say, in Taoism, it's like many ancient traditions, it attempts for us to harmonize with nature and to do so seasonally. So a lot of what you're going to see in here, you need the code book to sort of, because it's written in this old codified language. But once you get it, it's really quite simple. So what do they say? Oh, during this season, it's advisable to retire early and arise early and go walking in order to absorb the fresh, invigorating energy. So the idea here is that, you want to get up with the dawn and like spring up, but don't sit down at your computer first. Don't sit down and start doom scrolling, because doom scrolling is not fresh, invigorating energy. Have you noticed? Right? So you want to actually like go out, move around, get your eyeballs moving in nature, deprogram your brain by having your eyes think you're approaching things, and get fresh. And you can attune to this time of year. Exercise more frequently, wear loose fitting clothing. These are all basically, they're like ritual type of actions, because in the ancient world, they felt that if all of nature is springing up and you try to clamp down, you'll be out of harmony with what is, and that will bring bad results to you. So they sometimes thought of that as more mystically, but we could just think of this as psychologically, right? The sun's rising in the morning and our bodies want to get up and start moving around. Go with that. Don't fall into the habit of doing something else. If you have, now's the time to call your telehealth therapist and be unrepressed emotionally, right? This is not, maybe during winter, you're like, well, I guess I'll just work it out. We'll just get through Christmas. My therapist is on vacation. They say, now's the time. Things are springing up. If you harmonize with that, that'll be more empowering than if you try to go against that energy. Okay, do stretching exercises to loosen up the tendons and the muscles. I really like this part. The myth of Easter could be about resilience, if we wanted to think about it in that way, mythically. It's very similar. The myth of Christ's resurrection is very similar to the Demeter-Persephone myth. It's nature restoring herself. This morning I was thinking of the word spring, because it can mean like boing, right? But it can also mean that if you push me this way, I'll come right back this way. During this time of year, that's what nature is doing. And so they felt that this liver meridian, this energy, is your capacity to roll with the punches. They felt that if you stretch yourself physically, these are like ritual behaviors that put you in harmony with that energy that all of life is tending toward at this time. I don't know, does that seem fun to you? Does that seem as cool to you as it does to me? Okay, cool. At least a few of us, it seems cool. All right, so let's hone it in. That's your history lesson on traditional Taoist practice. Let's make it apply to our real lives. So what I want to suggest to you is this is the time of growth, and our main, where is it in here? Our main injunction that we want is emotionally, it is good to develop equanimity. Since this is the season when the universal energy begins anew and rejuvenates, one should attempt to correspond to it directly by being open and unsuppressed, both physically and emotionally. Sounds easy in writing, Huang Di. How are we going to do that in our real lives? So I wanted to try to make our lives easy today and give it to you really simple. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, for the remaining 2 months-ish of spring, 2 or 3, something like that, is start small and do one thing at a time. Call it the wisdom of sprouts and shoots. Start small and do one thing at a time. You could think of this perhaps as like a metaphorical interpretation of arise early and take in the invigorating energy. This is the direct antidote to overwhelm. If we think about the times when we are overwhelmed, it's coming because we don't know how to start small and we feel like we have 1,000 things to do at a time. And it's pretty easy, right? If you just think, so don't do this too long, but we're going to try on a mind experiment. You ready? Think of the problems in your life that need to be solved. Okay, now stop thinking about those problems in your life. But what you may notice, okay, let's do one more. And then we'll do some qigong or something to snap us out of it. Think of the problems on planet Earth that need to be solved. Okay, and then stop it. Okay, monkey stretch. Oh, wow, it's okay. I'm invigorated. Okay, what you'll probably notice is that if you think about that, one, your mind is a very pleasant servant. You ask your mind, think of the problems, and your mind goes, problems? I can do that. I got so many. Here you go, buddy. Here's all the problems I can think of. But they'll also come up as the big looming thing, and all of them at once. If you knew what to do later today, if you knew what, like right now, if you knew that sitting here, listening to this talk with your friends, and then having a coffee afterward and discussing what came up for you, if you knew that that was the best thing for you to be doing, the best use of your time, that's not overwhelming at all. Is it just continue listening to the talk, and then Suran, naturalness, spontaneity. Next thing to do is have a coffee. And then once you do that, well, what comes next? Well, for me, I go home and work on my taxes. Oh, wait. And to do that, I'm going to need to make a profit and loss sheet for the year 2021. Oh, I actually know how to make a profit and loss sheet. All of a sudden, it became unoverwhelming because it's one thing. And it starts small. If make a profit and loss sheet is too big, it's open PayPal, open Stripe, open Google Sheets, right? One thing, start small. Is that a simple enough injunction for you to begin to harmonize with the energy of spring? Let's do a case study. Are you ready? Oh, here's our elements. So winter was the water element, like water congeals into itself. Spring is the wood element, like a growing plant. Its energy goes up. Summer goes out. It's the fire element. It radiates. Then for a minute in late summer, things get neutral. And then in autumn, you harvest everything and the leaves fall down. And then in winter, you're ready to go in again. And ideally, the cycle continues on. Okay, so today on our injunction to do one thing at a time, pick just one thing and start small so that we can attune to the rejuvenating energy, so that we can become ambassadors of regeneration. I'm going to do a case study, and this is on our climate change activism. So if you were to think, if you do that same thought experiment, we already sort of did it. Think of all the problems on planet Earth that need to, and there's a lot, or think of all the activists, think of all the social action that you would do if you had the time, the energy, or the knowledge. It can be a bit overwhelming. This is where I want to invoke the idea of a liturgical calendar. If you had a liturgical calendar, there would be a couple things on there. There would be Earth Month. There would probably be St. Francis Day. There's some type of wintertime celebration, and there's a water communion on there. So I want to invoke this idea that you could use an inner liturgical calendar, that this month, you don't have to fix all the problems that there are. Of course, you're still going to promote you the vote. You're going to start studying who's on the ballot. Oh, this is a voting year. You're going to keep studying that, of course, but aim your focus just for April on one thing, which is reversing climate change. First, carbon neutral by, let's be easy with it, 2030. Just net zero carbon emissions, 2030, no problem. Just this month. And if you were to take that as your goal, what would be one thing that you could do where you could start small? Okay, let me check my notes here about this case study. Okay, so about our case study, I have good news for you, which is that I'm not going to fill up the rest of our short amount of time remaining with all of the evidence for climate change and all of the bad, because you've heard that talk before, haven't you? We don't need to do that again. That's not arising early and taking in the fresh, invigorating energy. You've already heard that talk. You can look at Project Drawdown. You can look at the EPA website. You know, there were 4 years where you couldn't do that. It ceased to exist, the EPA website. So for a while, I combated my overwhelm by the one thing I was doing was about getting a non-science denier elected to the highest office in the United States, right? Just one thing, just one thing. So I want to talk not about all of that, but about one thing that you can do. I believe the most powerful thing that you can do in Earth Month, aligned with the spring season, is to become a climate change educator, to become a climate change educator. All right, why am I not telling you to do the A, B, C? Well, you've got Project Drawdown, you've got Bill McKibben, you've got the EPA website, they've got all of this cool educational stuff that you can work with. You've got the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I memorized that one this week, the IPCC, because they just published a really great document that you should check out if you want all the details and exactly what to do. So that point about the EPA website disappearing and coming back really hones in on my thinking. I've told some of you the story about how long ago, my main idea was that I wanted to just move out on the land and be like an eco-hermit, right? And just live as low impact. And it wasn't just because I wanted to get away from all of the wild weirdness that society is, but I thought that that would make a difference. I thought that that would make a positive difference. There've been a couple of decades now where well-meaning hippies like myself have realized that that doesn't make as much difference as we would have liked it to. So, while our individual actions are certainly important, they are relatively not that important. If you change your personal actions and the leader of your country, for example, rolls back all of the environmental regulations, starts a enemy relationship with the other people who signed on to the Paris Accord, your individual actions don't mean all that much. And even if we vote well and get our friends and family to vote well and protect voting rights where they are most needed in the frontline communities that will be most subject to the downstream effects of climate change, and we get America doing the right thing, that doesn't mean all that much if Brazil has an authoritarian autocrat that just promotes deforestation at every moment. The best thing that you can do, the one thing that you can do, and start small, is to become a climate change educator. Our personal decisions do matter, but I don't think a sermon on that is as valid as it might have been 5 years ago, a decade ago. If I eat more plant-based meals, I haven't made that much of a dent. But if I and my family make and eat more plant-based meals, I've made a little bit more of a dent. Then if I teach our congregation how to make plant-based meals, we've made a little more of a dent. And if the congregation teaches their family, and why should we do that? And why should we get the ingredients from a local CSA instead of far, far away? Then we've started to make a dent. It requires, though, that you become a climate change educator, not someone, and this might be a little foreign to us as UUs because we don't proselytize. But this is one of the places where you may need to take your actual religious values of the interconnected web of all life and take them out and share them with others. So you get your vegetables from a local CSA, and we've just gotten rid of a lot of use of refrigerants and diesel in transporting our food. We've chosen low methane producing sources of food. We've chosen food that doesn't take a lot of water to produce. And all of a sudden, if you can spread that message, you've made a much bigger dent. When you feel as if you're making a dent like that, you feel empowered. And when you're empowered, you can take the next step. In a famous verse from the Tao Te Ching 64, Lao Tzu says, "A tree that fills the arm's embrace is born from a tiny shoot. A terrace 9 layers high starts from a basket full of earth. The ascent of 100 strides starts right beneath your foot." So when you can find one small step to take, you get empowered to make the other one. The other piece of my thinking on this is that it really aligns with, I've talked to you before, this is just a little image from the book Doing Democracy, and this is by Bill Moyers and friends, and their system is called the Movement Action Plan. Don't worry too much about all that's up there, that's just to have a fun image, but it basically consists of 4 parts. You need to expose that what we're doing in the status quo is not actually aligned with what we are saying we're doing. It's not aligned with our values. Then you need to educate widely. Once you've educated, you can mobilize. And once mobilizing has made the required change, you can continue the struggle. When I think about mobilizing on behalf of climate change, I get a little bit overwhelmed. Does anyone, can you feel that when you think, oh yeah, let's mobilize it? So think about all that needs to be done in mobilizing for climate change. It might bring on that same thing. And part of it is, well, we may not know where to start. Do I start by printing a flyer? Do I start by, which issue? And then how do you mobilize about refrigerant use? This is one, if you remember that talk on the drawdown, that's one of the main ways that we can reverse climate change, is change the type of refrigerants that are being used. So do you have a march with sign, down with refrigerants, let's warm up your houses and cool down the atmosphere? I'm not sure. Okay, and then what about, food waste, right? You could certainly march for food waste, but is that the place where we're going to apply the best leverage? It's a little odd. How do we mobilize in terms of reversal of climate change? What I figured out for me in terms of this movement action plan of expose, educate, mobilize, and continue the struggle is that we're not actually at mobilize yet. We're not actually at mobilize yet. We need to expose and we need to educate. If we think of ourselves as climate change educators, we will be applying ourselves where the most leverage is and where the most effort is needed. You have one step that you can take, and it's even small. I got 2 minutes left. Let me make the step even smaller for you, if you don't mind. So become an educator. That doesn't sound like the take it easy message you started with, Fajun. Okay, it's not a bait and switch. I want you to think about the ecology of activism, or an ecosystem of activism. We talked about this. This has some Buddhist philosophy on it, but it's the idea that it takes all kinds. In that sermon a number of weeks ago on our YouTube, like, share, and subscribe, I said we need power holders, philanthropists, people of privilege. We need critical theorists and thinkers. We need peacemakers running our first aid station. We need vibes watchers, making sure we all stay nonviolent and the agents provocateurs do not mess up our tactics. We need direct action enthusiasts, We also need visionaries, space holders, and meditators. So we need an ecosystem of activism. We don't just need people who know how to make stuff on Photoshop and then everybody gets to put it on their Instagram. We do need them. We don't just need them. We don't need just people who know what the heck was Reverend Fodrian talking about refrigerants. Oh, I read Project Drawdown. I can tell you about that. We don't just need compost experts or recycling experts. That's our DRE. We need all of them. The good news here is that in becoming a climate change educator, your one step, your small thing I want you to focus on, you can follow your curiosity. You can follow skills you already have. You can follow audiences that are already open to listening to you. You can start exactly where you are, because in an ecosystem of activism, you might be the nitrogen fixer, you might be the honeybee habitat, you might be the hummingbird, whatever hummingbirds do. You might be the one that eats the mosquitoes, but there is a job for you. You can start small with what's already natural for you. Okay, finishing it up. Here we go. So you're going to research, you're going to take actions, you're going to become an expert and an educator on your facet. And because I am a good educator, I'm going to offer you accountability, which is when we come back for our first sermon in May, which is on May Day Revolutions. I want to hear, what conversations did you have about climate change from your particular niche? How did you play a part in that ecosystem of activism? How did you become a climate change educator and do your one step and make it a small one to contribute to a very large movement? The challenges that face us are immense, but we have the power that Lao Tzu taught us to take it step by step. When we do so, we avoid the sense of frustration and overwhelm that comes from that springtime energy that tells us we must grow, being blocked by our own disempowerment that comes either from within or from without. When we know what is ours to do, when we know the next step to take, we can take it with confidence, humility, and pride. And we can all move forward to sharing a more and more beautiful world. So thank you so much. I hope that you will do a monkey stretch later. I hope that you will read the liturgical calendar of your Yellow Emperor's Classic of Internal Medicine. And I hope that you will take one small step toward becoming an ambassador of regeneration and a climate change educator.